At 89 years old, I have come to realize one thing. We are often saved from our greatest tragedies by the smallest of creatures. Usually, when we think of heroes, we imagine men in iron armor or soldiers with heavy weapons. But for my grandfather William, the true hero of the Great War was a creature that weighed less than 5 pounds, a tiny matted ball of fur that didn't just save his life, it saved his hardening soul. Today, I want to tell you about a small light that flickered in the darkest days of 1944, a light he called hope. The winter of 1944. The forests of Europe were colder than anything words can describe. My grandfather William was barely 20 years old back then, just a boy, really. He used to tell me about the madness of the hunger they felt. One night, their unit was cut off in the deep woods, and the supply trucks were days behind. For 3 days, not a single scrap of bread touched a soldier's lips. The cold bit into their bones, and the hunger started to eat them from the inside out. Grandfather said, "Mary, we were beginning to lose our human faces. The men's eyes were hollow, and they looked at one another like enemies. The war wasn't just killing us, it was snuffing out the mercy in our hearts." On one of those horrific nights, while Grandfather was on watch, he heard a faint, pathetic whimpering from the darkness of the trees. At first, he thought it was a hallucination brought on by starvation, but the sound came closer. He raised his rifle, squinting into the shadows, and there, struggling through the deep snow, shivering on the brink of death, was a tiny puppy. He was so small, so helpless, just a handful of black fur against the endless white. In that moment, Grandfather reached into his pocket and pulled out his last remaining piece of bread. It was hard as a rock and frozen solid. He was supposed to eat it himself. It was his last hope of survival. But as he looked into those wide, glass-like eyes of the puppy, his frozen heart simply melted. He soaked the bread in a bit of water and gave it to the creature. In that second, Grandfather said he forgot he was even hungry. The puppy never left the unit after that. At first, the other soldiers grumbled, "We're starving as it is. What are we supposed to do with a dog?" But Grandfather tucked him inside his heavy overcoat, keeping him warm with the heat of his own chest. He named him Hope. Before long, this tiny creature became the unit's lucky charm. The soldiers began to share their own meager rations with him. Grandfather told me, once Hope arrived, we started to laugh again. Every morning he would wake us up by licking our faces. Watching him wag his tail and run through the dirt reminded us that the war would end one day, that there was a life waiting for us back home where things like this existed. But Hope was more than just a mascot. One night, while the entire camp was dead asleep, Hope suddenly became restless. He didn't bark loudly. It was as if he knew the danger required silence. He just growled low and deep, staring into the dark edge of the forest. Grandfather woke up and saw the dog's intense focus. He quietly alerted the men. It turned out a German scouting party had crawled within yards of their perimeter. If it hadn't been for that dog's ears, none of them would have seen the morning. Hope became a hero who saved the lives of 100 men. When the war finally ended, it was time to go home. The rules were strict. No animals were allowed on the transport ships. The commanders told Grandfather, "The dog stays here." But for William, Hope wasn't just a dog. He was a piece of the humanity he had almost lost in those trenches. He hid the puppy inside his army duffel bag, piling his clothes on top of him. Throughout the long voyage across the Atlantic, Hope didn't make a single sound. It was as if he understood the secret, as if he wanted to go home just as badly as the men did. Only when they reached the port of New York did Grandfather finally pull him out of the bag. He said that was the first time Hope smelled American soil, looking around at the bright lights of the city with absolute wonder. When Grandfather finally arrived back here, at this very farm, my grandmother Sarah ran out to meet him. But she stopped dead in her tracks when she saw he wasn't alone. A tiny black dog jumped out of his bag and began to race around the yard, barking with a joy that seemed to fill the entire valley. Grandfather looked at Sarah and said, "Sarah, this is Hope. If it wasn't for him, I never would have made it back to you." In our darkest hours, he reminded us what it felt like to be human. Hope lived on our farm for over 10 years after that. He was the living symbol of peace. I remember being a little girl, playing in his fur and falling asleep with my head on his side. Even though he had seen the horrors of the war, there was no hate in him, no fear. He only knew how to love. I am 89 years old now. Sometimes, late at night, when I hear a dog bark in the distance, I remember my grandfather's stories. War can take everything from us, our homes, our loved ones, even our future. But if we can keep just a small spark of mercy in our hearts for another living thing, then hope is still alive. Grandfather always said, kindness is our strongest weapon. If you are feeling alone today, or if your faith in the future is fading, remember William and his little hope. Sometimes, to save the whole world, all you need is a crust of bread and a merciful heart. I am Mary, and today another warm page has been added to my diary. Tell me, has there ever been a small friend or a moment of mercy that gave you hope when things were dark? Please leave a comment. I want to hear about your hope too. Until next time, keep the light of hope in your hearts.